Hi, friends. Host Eric here. It's talking with people. I'm here with Michael, and somebody I've spoken with before.
Nope.
Pretty active in the personality type community, and he Facebook messaged me
Yep.
about his own type. I said from dealing with him in the past that he was an ENFJ. He wanted to come on and debate something. I'm not exactly sure what, so I said, sure, let's make a video. If it flies, it flies.
Yeah. Okay. So the idea is that a lot of logical people, for example, they stay logical, and that's their sort of constraint. Like you get ESTJ personality types, they just use SI, for example, and until they don't escape their constraint, they're unable to leave the possibility of being who they are. So, for example, that's like one idea, but like the metrics of human nature and the understanding behind everybody's like sense of being versus how it affects them logically is very like heavy. There's a lot of it.
Where do you think this, or how do you think it manifests that people, I guess, do what?
Yeah,
they transcend their tool function in some capacity, or they come to
correct.
become.
Yeah.
So they're no longer limited by their tool function, so they can use other things as tool functions?
Exactly. Yes. They change internally if they can from within, and they associate new functions to the way of their behavior, or like the way that they're born to be.
Do you think you've managed
like they change their inner sense of
Do you
reliance.
think that you've managed to master using different cognitive functions as your tool function?
Absolutely.
Okay.
A lot. All of
Because
them.
you still act the same as you've always acted, as far as I can tell.
Well, recently I was just speaking to INFJ for 6-7 days, like on video chat. So she made me more soft in that way, and less considerate of being factually like competent or factually aware, because I was adapting to her desires of wanting to like talk.
Well, I would contend that no, it's not possible to learn to use some other function than your tool function as your tool function. So what would be your claim as to why that would be? What do you think a cognitive function is?
A cognitive function is simply a preference based on how your mind like observes sensory or intuitive data.
So
And
if I like cheese, do I have a cognitive function preference for cheese?
if you like tea, is that going to be your cognitive function preference?
If I like cheese, for example, is that a cognitive
Oh,
function?
cheese.
Like the liking of
cheese.
cheese?
No, it's not.
So how do we
Absolutely.
distinguish from what's a preference and what's a cognitive function?
A cognitive function has a certain definitive aspect of based of what it is, like whatever it is. Like now it's like reading into certain things like mechanics, for example, like you see internally how the process works, and then you defer the idea that you're taking like micro observations based on what you see.
So every
and then,
NI user then, by that definition, is it true that all the NI DOMs will be equally good at figuring out how to repair a car engine, for example?
They wouldn't be equally good based on the sense of their functions, based on their preference of how they want to
Would an
wire their mind.
INFJ be good at that?
Complete
Would an
experience.
INFJ be good at figuring out that logic?
Not exactly. Not every INFJ, because there's a variety of different people like that have different
But
abilities.
if NI, but overall, NI DOMs would be better at figuring out how to repair an engine by your calculation of NI than non-NI DOMs in general.
Yeah,
right?
a little bit better. Yeah, a little bit better. 51 to 50% better. Yeah, something
Okay.
like that, because NE can come up with a lot of ideas on how things work as well.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I would say that you're beginning with some very misdefined understandings of things. You don't really have a definition of a cognitive function. A cognitive function needs to be distinguished from that which is not a function by saying specifically that it's a process executed upon an environment of some sort. So if we in fact are talking about functions that are processes, then the thing you're saying is not a process, it's a description of somebody being good at something. That's different. That's a description of a person, not of a cognitive function.
Yes. And because that person is good, that like because he's good at what he does, that basically relates back to the cognitive function. based on what the cognitive function
So
is in
what
itself.
would be the advantage then for me if I were an ENTP who learned to use, let's say, FI as my tool function? What would be the advantage for me then?
Okay, so if you learn to use FI as your tool function, you would be easy. Like I saw your videos, you were having problems with like talking to others. You said like it was a bit difficult for you to like upkeep some conversations with like females and stuff. So you would probably be more endowed to have the capacity to keep up conversations with females. And like you would be more understanding because you would see a different type of perspective to life and the world and how things are. And it would make you more... So would I switch
back and forth between these willy-nilly, or would there be some understanding of which context is most appropriate to use them, or what?
Yes, correct. Yeah, you would be able to like see more things. Like you would be more aware of things, and you would find more logic.
So let's say I'm talking to somebody, and she says, "I really think that you know the flat Earth people they've got some good arguments." Now I can respond with FI and maybe express my own attachment to a round Earth theory. I could respond with FE. I could say, "Oh, that's nice," or whatever. I could respond with TI and say that doesn't make any sense. I could respond with TE and say, "Well, why do you care about this and what use are you having for it?" Okay, but note something. Note. We all have habits and reflexive tendencies towards attending via one manner or another. And the reason it would be a terrible, terrible idea if it were possible, which it's not, but a terrible idea to try to learn to use FI as a tool function is I have no experience using it. I spent my whole life using TI as a tool function. So I'm going to do a terrible job with it.
Okay, so I'll give you an example of why you would want to use it as a dominant function. You would want to use FI as a dominant function if you're writing poems, if you're trying to relate to how society works.
But I do write poems, and I do relate to how society works, and I don't use FI, because FI is a interested calculus. It is a process called using an interested rather as opposed to a disinterested calculus. One can't use both. And it is not the case that it doesn't matter how many years one puts into a function as a native manner of attention, that one can willy-nilly learn new functions and apply them appropriately is insane.
Well, okay. So think of it like this. For example, I'm ENFJ mentally, but I want to become ENTJ. Is that possible? No. Well, it sort of is. If I'm an ENFJ in mind, it functions desiring another preference, right?
No, but it's not a preference. It's not a preference. It's a manner of attention. It's a way of paying attention. Your personality is the way it is because you spent many years paying attention by a certain implicit value, that is to say your dominant function, and utilizing by nature, every time you encounter a problem, your tool function, which is why you are addressing this problem with NI rather than with TI, as I am. But this is a form that is most appropriate to use TI. Doesn't matter how long you spend trying to learn to deal with this form by a TI, it will either be too frustrating for you and you'll give it up, or you'll just never quite get the hang of it. Regardless, you're never going to interact by a TI because it's not your tool function. You can't make it your tool function by willing it to be so.
Okay, I see. Well, I guess it is pretty situational. So I guess there is some FC, and that's kind of what I like preferred to do at first, like when I was a kid. And then after I decided that this SC is not these sensations, these feelings, they're not getting me anywhere. So then that's it. Like you just simply forfeit a function and you start learning another one, maybe.
No, or something like that. It doesn't work like that. Look, when your function stack doesn't work to do what it's supposed to do for you, you do in fact move to your backslot functions sometimes. But that's not a good thing. That means shit's going south. It means shit's going south. You cannot successfully be compelled by circumstance or anything else to live in your unconscious functions as your conscious functions for very long at all. Now, I certainly can experience feelings, and I do a lot. I'm quite emotional in a lot of ways.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that I use it as a means to calculate the statuses of things. And FI and TI are two alternate and opposing ways to calculate the status of things. They're not always in opposition, they're not always exclusive, but often they produce contradictory indications. What would I like the answer to be is not often the same as what the answer actually ought to be considered based on TI logic. And so because they often come into conflict with each other, and because we reflexively do something like open the door with our right hand rather than deciding which hand to use every time we go to a door, it's necessarily the case that we become vastly better at one of those functions, vastly more comfortable at it than we ever will be at the other one. So if we try to utilize the other one, even if it's more contextually appropriate, we're only going to end up with disastrous outcomes, because that's not who we are. We are the person who expresses attention in the following configuration, whatever it might be.
I agree with that too. I do, but there's more possibilities. So there's more, like I look at a problem, I look at it from different angles. I look at it from the logical side of thinkers, I look at it from feelers, and I look at it from other people, and I take everybody's perspective and I synchronize it together to try to understand how, I know that thinkers wouldn't be lenient with feelers, for example, and I would synchronize the two ideas together. I would be like, okay, so the thinkers, they have a problem with understanding this feeling, and I see the reason why. I would be like, okay, well, I want to look outside of functions for a second, because functions, they kind of give you a bias. They give you a bias on how you act, and they give you a negative bias on how you think. So what I want to do is actually present to society the matter of fact, the actuality of how things are. So I would look at like a thinker, and I would look at a feeler, and I would see how it's possible to change that. But in my mind, I'm obviously able to like just use logic and understand that other person.
But you want to bridge. You want to bridge those two conflicting sides, right?
Exactly.
So let's say the thinkers want to kill all the 2-year-olds, and the feelers don't want to kill any. You'd like to see us compromise and kill half of them.
Compromise is not killing half. Compromise might be just finding another idea.
I see. Well, what if both sides are dead set on it, though? Are you going to use a motivational calculus to figure out who's right?
Yes. Yeah.
But Michael, one side's advocating killing all the 2-year-olds. We don't need to use a motivational calculus. One side is advocating for evil, and the other side for good. One side is completely correct, and the other side completely wrong. There's no appealing to the middle ground here with the successful results.
You know what I would do? I would look at the evil people, and I would look into the heart of their idea. Why are they trying to kill these 2-year-olds? And I would think about it like, what is the purpose? Why does it matter? To me, the world matters. To me, society matters. I care about.
But Michael, we're making a moral calculus on their plan to murder a bunch of 2-year-olds. It doesn't matter why they want to do it. It's wrong. We condemn them for it directly. That's a TI response. We respond on principle. These principles are universal and need to be applied universally, and it's certainly applied to those people who want to kill 2-year-olds, just as it does to anybody else. That's a TI answer. Now, the thing is, you cannot bring yourself, no matter how hard you try, to engage with these ideas via TI modality. That is proof right there that you are not successfully learning and applying new functions. And yes, it's true that cognitive functions present a bias when you use them without being aware of the fact that you're using them, so to speak. In other words, everybody who goes and engages attentionally in the world begins with no notion of what it means to have an attentional manner at all. And until we develop the proper linguistic tools to understand ourselves and others as expressions of being rather than as characters, then we'll continue to make silly mistakes.
Okay, true. I agree with that too. And I wanted to ask you, how do you differentiate using SC and TE? How do you see the difference between those two functions making logical choices?
Well, socially? I don't see TE as making logical choices. I see it as solving problems. It's a solvency function. You can use extroverted thinking is a manner of attention that approaches anything in the world and deals with it on its logical terms, not on a universal logic. So if I'm fixing something like a broken door, what it's going to take to fix it is going to be entirely particular on that specific situation, and the specifics there of it. TE is the kind of logic that allows me to figure out what's going on there, okay? That's TE. Now, SE is the following through of doing the things I need to do to fix it at that point, once I figured out how to fix it.
Okay, could I give you an idea then? Okay, so I'm only using SC with you because we're talking about psychology. But if like I needed to do my dance, my like electro dance, I would be using TE because I know the elements that work that comprise the dance and how to make the dance more efficient and better in its final production versus just coming up with it on a feeling matter.
Well, so the SI, you'd remember the steps of it.
Is SI. Is SI.
All you're doing is remembering something you've already learned. You're accessing your SI. Everybody has some baseline level of SI, even if it's polar. You might be an ENFP, by the way. It's quite plausible. But the thing is,
not at all.
I still stick with ENFJ. But if you were going to point to another type that's plausible, you could point potentially to ENFP. But my feeling on you is ENFJ from.
No. I lived with an ENFP, as you know, for 2 years. I was the one always keeping organization all the time, and she was struggling with organizing. She had her stuff thrown around. My entire place is always neat and stuff. So I love order absolutely, but I don't mind disorder if it happens, kind of.
All right,
and the reason I don't want to judge is because maybe it's native to me. Instead, what I want to do is the polar opposite. I want to be able to perceive before taking action on judgments.
Okay. Well, you got to remember that your dominated judging functions are misnamed judging functions. They're interface functions, and they're paired with knowledge functions because you want to interact with the world in a way that's immediately responsive. You want it to prompt some reaction in me, and then you respond to that, and then I respond to that, and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's why it's paired with a knowledge function rather than a deliberation function, because that kind of interaction, that kind of act, get, receive, combo punch thing that forms interfaces with the world, it requires a quicker kind of status determination, such as knowledge, than does an action deliberation pair, which takes time to think about things before taking any kind of action and is less responsive as a consequence in the immediate time frame.
Yeah. Would you say all thinkers end up having sociopathic tendencies or conform to sociopathic traits based on the black and white mindset? No? Oh, I don't think so.
I mean, I think the key thing about sociopaths is that they lack a native sympathy or empathy towards when they see suffering. But I'm very much pained by the sight of any kind of suffering. I avoid it at all costs. If I see one of those ads on TV about the animals being treated well, I run out of the room. It causes me a great deal of suffering to endure FI. That's why I would not ever want to make it into any function other than my polar, because it tires me out. I don't like introverted feeling. It makes me need to go to sleep after I feel things too strongly. But that does not mean I'm a sociopath. It means I'm an FI polar person who doesn't know how to regulate his own emotions well.
Yeah, me neither. Not that well, I guess. Yeah, that's special part of it. But the idea is, for example, like, okay, so how would I look at your situation? You look at it sort of in a contextual way. The way I would look at the same thing you're describing is I would say, okay, so there's two forms of sociopaths. High functioning care about the world. Low functioning do not care about the world. They bring all the attention on themselves. High functioning sociopaths are aware of things. They're capable to develop empathy over time. It's not stagnated for them. And the idea that this universal...
That's not a proper definition. Empathy and sympathy are native things to the human experience in normal people. Sociopaths don't experience them. I experience them from childhood on, from early on. And the fact that I don't regulate my emotions well is native to being FI polar. The fact that I have those emotional responses and have them intensely and deeply means that I'm fully human and not a sociopath.
Okay. Yeah, I see that. I'm like I think I am. So, am I a sociopath? You probably think,
possibly, certainly. You are
sadly.
You are somebody who's outside of the normal typological display range.
I would say autism. I'd say I have autism.
You do
want
not
to
have
test
fucking
it?
autism. Everybody wants to say they have autism all of a sudden. It's
You know what? Okay.
fucking
You
ridiculous.
should see my Okay. You how would you be able to tell if I do or don't? Like,
well, I used to work in special ed. I worked with lots of actually autistic people and people with high functioning autism that are now called Asperger's, and people with lower functioning autism and that are still called autistic, and you're not like any of them at all. So you're not autistic. But besides my own personal experience, it's just this awful mission creep from a legitimate disorder called autism that causes people to have mental retardation into a spectrum of possible behaviors that are kind of resembling that, and calling it the same thing. And it's just fucking garbage. So I have no respect for the current understanding of autism and Asperger's.
I absolutely agree with that. Okay, that's kind of cool. What about so Megan? Why can't Megan, like me and Megan, we try to have a video chat together and talk about life, and she just said like, I don't really get you, and I was like, what do you mean you don't get me? And then I was wondering like, is Megan an ENFJ? And she looks at me and like tells me like yeah, she's all judgmental and stuff, but I think that's ESFJ.
I don't have an answer to you, Michael. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I see a certain amount of mania. I see a certain amount of what I would consider somewhat delusional understandings of things. But as far beyond that, I would say cognitive function wise, I mostly see FE concerns. Whether or not you're successfully executing the FE is another question. Sometimes you are, sometimes you're not. And I see 4-slot TI, where the consistency just isn't a concern for you, or possibly 7th, but probably 4th, I would guess. As to why you display oddly, I don't know. I would guess you probably had some sort of weird childhood that is not desirable to have, I would suppose, but I don't know.
Oh,
no. No idea.
Childhood was fine. My mind is weird. Yeah, my mind's sociopathic, but I'm caring and nice and all that. Try to be as much as I can be. I have a natural sociopathic mind, probably, and mix that with autism or something like that.
I would believe the sociopathy just because of the way that you misdefine empathy and sympathy as a skill one learns rather than a native inherent part of human experience. So that would tend to be suggestive that maybe you're onto something there. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want to pass any sort of psychological judgment on you. I have no idea what's going on with you. But I do know that you are not using TI very high in the stack, and so there's no way you're an ENTP, as you initially said when you talked to me. You're definitely, 4th or 7th. So there you go. All right, thanks for watching, everybody, and have a pleasant day. This has been an interesting conversation with Michael. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.